The glittering appearances of British stars on black and white red carpets, their radiant smiles before the cameras, all seemed perfect. Yet behind that dazzling spotlight lay a dark secret. They had to construct entire sham marriages to conceal their true sexuality. It was an unspoken contract enforced by the kings of the stage to bury forbidden desires. A cruel confession that tore through a wife's heart on the eve of her wedding. A stain that nearly destroyed an acting legend in a public restroom. So who were these hidden names? Subscribe to the channel and step into the first story. The story of the man who wore the most perfect mask of his time. 1. Cary Grant. A gilded cage of desire and Hollywood's most perfect performance. Paramount Pictures once issued a chilling warning. Get married, or your contract will be terminated immediately. It wasn't merely a reminder, it felt like an ultimatum. Archibald Leach, a young Englishman who had crossed the ocean to America, buried his past to sculpt a flawless Cary Grant, the very embodiment of masculinity and charm. On the surface, he was the gentleman millions of women longed for, but behind the spotlight, he carried a secret that could shatter everything he had worked so hard to build. That secret was named Randolph Scott. For 12 long years, the two actors lived together under one roof by the Malibu coast. The press mockingly called it Bachelor Hall, a home for bachelors. Photos of them cooking, swimming, and playfully basking in the sun leaked out, fueling whispers. Everyone vaguely sensed that the bond between the two men had gone far beyond ordinary friendship. But Hollywood at the time did not tolerate anything that strayed from the norm. And soon, pressure from the media and studio bosses began to close in. To silence the rumors, Cary was forced into calculated marriages. His first marriage to actress Virginia Cherrill was, in truth, a desperate move orchestrated by the studio to salvage his image as a charming ladies' man. The women who passed through Cary's life, whether knowingly or not, ultimately became living shields. They were the perfect cover to hide him from the public's scrutiny and judgment. A staff member later recounted that on a late Malibu night, when only the sound of waves whispered against the shore, Cary and Randolph sat quietly on the porch. Away from every camera, their fingers gently brushed against each other in the dark, exchanging long-suppressed, aching kisses. Randolph softly held Cary and whispered, his voice laced with helplessness, "I truly don't want to lose you." In public, Cary Grant always knew how to flash that irresistible half-smile, calmly brushing off every rumor. But once the bedroom door closed, his body trembled with the longing to live authentically. He yearned to hold the hand of the man he loved without fearing that everything would be taken from him. He had given the world a flawless Cary Grant, but deep inside, Archie Leach remained forever trapped in a golden cage of forbidden desires. The world was hopelessly in love with Cary Grant, but no one was ever allowed to truly see Archibald Leach. Charm, at times, is nothing more than a magnificent cloak draped over a fractured life. But without that charm, what would one have left to survive in this ruthless capital of cinema? 2. Charles Laughton, a monster on screen and a 33-year promise in the shadows. Elsa Lanchester, his wife, wrote plainly in her memoir, "He was homosexual, and I knew it from very early on." There was no need for the press to fabricate anything. The truth about Charles Laughton was revealed by the very woman who walked beside him until the end of his life. Charles Laughton did not possess the magnetic beauty of Cary Grant. He was heavyset, imposing, with sharp features, often cast in intense and haunting roles such as King Henry VIII or the hunchback Quasimodo. Yet his extraordinary talent was the only lifeline that kept him afloat in the entertainment industry. And at that time, he understood all too well that a single stain of personal scandal would erase the name Charles Laughton instantly. In 1929, he married actress Elsa Lanchester. Together, they projected the image of an intellectual, slightly eccentric, yet devoted British artistic couple. But the naked truth revealed itself on their suffocating wedding night. In the dim hotel room, Charles did not approach his wife. He withdrew into a corner of the bed, hands clenched, sweating, his voice trembling and breaking as he confessed that he could not touch her, because deep within, he only desired men. Faced with that brutal truth, Elsa did not scream. She stepped forward, took his hand firmly, and through tears whispered a vow. "We will build a fortress together to stand against them." That promise marked the beginning of 33 years of a Lavender marriage, a sorrowful agreement. No intimacy, no children, even though Elsa later painfully admitted she had quietly terminated 2 pregnancies. Elsa chose to step back, turning herself into the perfect piece to protect her husband's deepest secret. From that moment on, their lives became a performance. Whenever they hosted parties, Elsa would link arms with her husband, smiling brightly as they welcomed Hollywood elites. They appeared to be the perfect couple. But when the last guest left and the door closed, Elsa's smile faded. In a corner of the room, the giant of the silver screen would collapse, trembling in fear of being exposed. Charles secretly sought fulfillment with young men in hidden boarding rooms or dark corners of film sets, constantly living in anxious dread. In those moments, Elsa would come to him, gently stroking his back, sharing the fear that threatened to destroy everything they had built. Looking back on that life filled with fear, one cannot help but bitterly realize he played monsters better than anyone on screen, perhaps because his own life was spent struggling to hide a monster within himself. And sometimes, behind those perfect smiles on the red carpet, lie contracts paid for with honor, love, and tears shed dry in the darkness. 3. A sardonic smile and a death sentence from the underworld. With his velvet voice and refined sardonic smile, Dennis Price was the embodiment of an elegant English aristocrat in the 1940s, especially after the resounding success of Kind Hearts and Coronets. On screen, Dennis Price was the definition of perfection. He carried himself with calm composure, delivered lines with razor-sharp precision, and possessed an invisible allure that made audiences unable to look away. To reinforce the image of a model English gentleman in the public eye, he entered a marriage with actress Joan Schofield in 1939. Together, they had 2 beautiful daughters, forming the picture of a flawless family without a single crack. But in mid-20th century London, homosexuality was not only a moral taboo, it was a crime punishable by imprisonment. Dennis Price, the refined man of the silver screen, belonged to that forbidden world. His seemingly perfect marriage was nothing more than a fragile facade, a desperate attempt to conceal his true self. And in 1950, that facade collapsed when Joan filed for divorce. Without the shield called family, Dennis's hidden life began to attract attention, and he quickly became prey for blackmailers. On cold London nights, Dennis would sit alone in his dark apartment, his trembling hands holding a crumpled blackmail letter. The scent of a young man who had left only hours earlier still lingered in the room. But brutal reality immediately tightened its grip on his mind. All it would take was one newspaper exposing him at underground venues, and his entire career and aristocratic reputation would turn to ashes. Day by day, the pressure gnawed at his soul, pushing his panic to its peak. In 1954, Dennis Price attempted suicide. Though he was fortunately saved, the wound within him would never fully heal. After crossing the boundary between life and death, there were late afternoons when Dennis would stand silently, watching his 2 daughters playing in the garden. With sorrow in his eyes, he wondered whether those innocent children would ever know that their father had nearly given up his life just to hide his longing to live authentically. He spent his entire life playing the role of a proper man, but the price of that performance was his freedom. And yet, the threats from the underworld were not the only pressure. Sometimes it is the glittering crown on stage that imprisons a person the most. 4. Laurence Olivier, the unspoken pact of the king of the stage. When people speak of Laurence Olivier, they speak of an immortal monument, the king of the English stage. In 1930, he married the talented actress Jill Esmond. Their marriage lasted a full 10 years and produced a son. And in the public eye, they were the royal family of the theatrical world. But behind that blazing red velvet curtain lay a truth only those involved could fully comprehend. Both Laurence and Jill carried different sexual desires. Jill was inclined toward women, while Olivier's body burned with secret desires for men. Their marriage did not stem from deception, but from an arrangement for survival in an era of prejudice. As their son Tarquin Olivier later recounted, "My mother lived within a circle of women friends, and both of them understood each other clearly before they married." That understanding was most vividly revealed one lively evening in New York during the 1930s. In a smoke-filled room, Laurence and Jill sat at a table with the legendary playwright Noel Coward. Beneath the table, hidden from prying eyes, Laurence's hand secretly reached for Noel with longing. Across from them, Jill saw everything, yet she only smiled faintly. Between those three brilliant individuals existed an invisible bond, a silent promise that they would protect one another from the outside world. For Jill Esmond, this marriage was never a regret, even when Olivier eventually left to be with Vivien Leigh. She understood the rules of the era. Only a perfect family served as a shield, granting Laurence the freedom to satisfy his hidden desires without losing his crown. Even though Olivier later tried to deny the rumors to preserve his legacy, the truth about that carefully constructed marriage of convenience remained a quiet, sorrowful pause in his life. A king may deceive the world through compromise, but for a man who chooses honesty from the very beginning, the pain left behind in a marriage can sometimes linger far longer. 5. Michael Redgrave, brutal honesty and a divided heart. Just by looking at the Redgrave family portrait, a distinguished father, the beautiful wife Rachel Kempson, and 3 children who would all become shining stars, one would immediately see the image of an ideal British family. Michael Redgrave was an exceptional talent in British cinema and theatre, the founder of a legendary acting dynasty. In 1935, he married actress Rachel Kempson, marking the beginning of a glorious legacy. To the public, they were the model of success, happiness, and propriety. That shield of respectability was so perfect it concealed even the harsh scrutiny of society and the law. Yet behind the radiant smiles in newspapers lay a painful truth. On the night before their wedding, the room was suffocatingly silent. Michael sat beside Rachel, his broad shoulders slumped. In a hoarse, breaking voice, he confessed that deep within, he was bisexual, but his desires leaned heavily toward men. "I owe you this truth. I will protect you all my life. But my true self belongs to another world." Rachel fell silent, tears rolling down her cheeks. But then, with all the courage of a woman in love, she reached out and held his hand tightly. She chose to love him as he truly was, even knowing that his heart would forever be divided. That acceptance was profound, yet also devastating. It opened the door to a double life filled with silent wounds. At night, Michael would sometimes disappear into London's underground world. When he returned home, the scent of another man's cologne would still linger on his collar. Rachel remained there, greeting him with a gentle smile, managing the household and raising their children. But deep within her chest lay a quiet pain, a wordless torment, knowing her husband had just held someone else in desires he could not deny. A wife's tolerance can preserve a distinguished family, but for some, darkness is the only place where they can truly be themselves. 6. Denholm Elliott, Two Worlds and a Place of Peace. Audiences may remember Denholm Elliott best as the clumsy yet endearing Dr. Marcus Brody in the Indiana Jones films. On screen, he was the embodiment of an eccentric, wise, and friendly English gentleman. But in reality, Denholm's life was far more complex and rebellious. He was bisexual, carrying intense desires for men. After a brief and failed first marriage to Virginia McKenna, Denholm entered a second marriage with Susan Robinson. This time, everything was entirely different. Their marriage did not follow conventional norms, but was instead an open and mutual agreement. In a post-war Britain still burdened with prejudice, Susan fully understood her husband's hidden life, his fleeting relationships with other men. Instead of divorce or confrontation, she transformed their marriage into a safe harbor, a strong shield protecting Denholm's career and reputation. One evening, when the weight of his emotions could no longer be contained, Denholm sat down and confessed everything to Susan. He spoke of secret parties in the shadows, where he shed all aristocratic facades and allowed other men to freely touch him, losing himself in unrestrained encounters. Hearing this, Susan broke down in tears. The raw truth wounded her deeply, and she asked for a divorce. But just 1 week later, she returned, not out of obligation, but out of love and an astonishing depth of understanding. She realized that this man carried two separate halves within him, and he needed both worlds to truly exist: a peaceful family life by day and wild, masculine desires by night. From then on, Denholm Elliott lived a double life, dangerous, yet strangely captivating. By day, under the bright lights of the Indiana Jones set, he smiled warmly, fully embodying the lovable Marcus Brody. He was the center of laughter, a wonderful colleague, but when the sun set, he shed his elegant suit and disappeared into the dark alleys of the underground world. And after those intense moments, he would quietly return home, where the living room lights were always warm and Susan sat waiting with a glass of wine in her hand, without jealousy or reproach. 7. Dirk Bogarde, The Bravest Role and a Lifetime of Fear. In the 1950s and 1960s, Dirk Bogarde was the definition of a matinee idol, a star beloved in every cinema slot. With his handsome looks, tender gaze, and a smile that melted millions of female hearts, Dirk was a box office machine of British cinema. He did not choose to enter a sham marriage like many of his peers, but instead built an impenetrable fortress of image. In truth, his heart and life belonged entirely to one man, Anthony Forwood. Anthony had once been married, but after his divorce, he moved in with Dirk. To the press, Anthony was merely a devoted manager. In reality, they shared a home and a love that lasted more than 4 decades in silence. He lived with Anthony Forwood for over 40 years, calling him a manager in public, but Forwood was in fact his lifelong partner, a staff member later admitted. On quiet weekend afternoons in their shared home, Dirk and Anthony would sit side by side, the only sound being the soft rustle of turning pages. Dirk would gently rest his head on his partner's shoulder, whispering that he was the only man who allowed him to be himself. But behind those tender moments always lingered a heavy sigh. They both understood that no one could ever be allowed to cross that threshold, because outside, danger was always waiting to suffocate them. Though Dirk publicly denied being gay, later declassified MI5 files confirmed that authorities were well aware of his same-sex relationships. Living in a time when homosexuality was criminalized, Dirk carried a constant fear of being trapped and blackmailed by the KGB. To protect himself, he gradually abandoned the image of a romantic prince and turned toward darker, more artistic roles. In 1961, Dirk made a shocking decision by taking the lead role in Victim, the first British film to directly use the word homosexual. He portrayed a lawyer being blackmailed over a same-sex relationship. The performance was so powerful and haunting that it mirrored his own life. Yet while his character on screen dared to stand up against blackmailers to defend the truth, in real life, Dirk chose to bury his secret until his final breath. He preferred to remain confined within the image of a lonely star rather than risk losing his career and the man he loved most. And although silence is sometimes maintained by closing doors, there are moments when secrets choose to reveal themselves in the most extravagant gatherings. 8. Ivor Novello, an open secret of the stage, and love songs that concealed the truth. If anyone could define the glamour and brilliance of British entertainment from the 1920s to the 1940s, it would undoubtedly be Ivor Novello. He was a genius playwright, an exceptional composer, and an actor of sculpted beauty. Women across Britain adored him, scrambling for tickets just to hear him sing his romantic ballads. But behind that radiant fame, Ivor's sexuality was an open secret, something everyone in the theater world knew, yet no newspaper dared to publish. In London's West End, everyone knew, but the public did not. Ivor Novello lived with Bobby Andrews for over 35 years. To maintain appearances and reinforce their protective facade, Bobby even entered into a formal marriage with Ivor's own female secretary. It was a strange yet necessary arrangement for them to continue existing and loving each other. The epicenter of elite artistic society at the time was Red Roofs, Ivor Novello's luxurious country estate. There, he hosted some of the most extravagant parties imaginable. As champagne filled the glasses and laughter echoed through the rooms, Ivor would sit at the piano, his fingers gliding across the keys, performing the romantic songs that made his name. And just behind him, Bobby Andrews always stood. Shielded from curious eyes, Bobby's hand would gently trace along Ivor's back, a gesture filled with possession and restrained desire. Those two men understood that only within the gates of Red Roofs, surrounded by others like them, could they freely embrace, freely exchange longing glances without fear of judgment. Through Bobby's connections, Ivor befriended Noel Coward, forming a closed circle where same-sex relationships could exist naturally and openly among those who shared the same world. They used their immense fame to protect one another, ensuring that rumors never reached the light. But when the party ended and he stepped beyond the gates of Red Roofs, Ivor Novello once again donned the image of the perfect romantic gentleman, smiling gracefully to satisfy the countless female admirers waiting outside. A perfect facade can keep you safe for decades, but one moment of weakness, one misstep, and everything can spiral into the abyss. 9. John Gielgud, A Dark Night in Chelsea and the Price of Suppression. John Gielgud was a living legend of the British stage. Unlike many of his peers, he never used a woman as a cover. But that did not mean he was free. For decades, John struggled to conceal his true self under the immense pressure of being a major star, fully aware that the laws of the time could utterly destroy people like him. And then tragedy struck on a fateful night in 1953, just after he had been knighted by the British Crown. That night, after an exhausting rehearsal and a few strong drinks to steady his nerves, John stepped out into the street. Loneliness and long-suppressed desires overcame the knight's reason. He entered a public restroom in Chelsea, clinging to a fragile hope of finding a fleeting connection, a moment to release the desires he had always been forced to bury. But instead of a hurried embrace, What greeted him was the blinding beam of a police flashlight shining directly into his face. In that cold and humiliating moment, John's heart nearly stopped. He knew that his entire legacy, career, and honor, built over a lifetime, were shattering at his feet because of a single moment of unrestrained longing. At the police station and in the subsequent court hearing, he tried to conceal his identity by using the name Arthur Gielgud. He was fined £10, a trivial sum, but journalists quickly caught wind of the truth. The press exposed the incident, turning him into the target of public ridicule. The scandal left a permanent psychological scar, causing him to turn down many opportunities to work in Hollywood for years out of fear of being denied a visa. Just days after the arrest, John had to return to the West End stage. Standing backstage, the master actor trembled uncontrollably. He feared stepping into the light, feared the boos and insults from the audience. But at that very moment, veteran actress Sybil Thorndike stepped forward and firmly took his hand. She looked him straight in the eyes and whispered with unwavering resolve, "Don't be afraid. They wouldn't dare boo me." When they walked out together, instead of contempt, the entire audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. That moment saved John Gielgud from the brink of collapse and contributed to the wave of momentum that would later lead to the Wolfenden Report, advocating for the rights of homosexuals. Yet, despite the audience's forgiveness that night, the overwhelming fear of his own identity continued to haunt him until his final days. 10. Sir Alec Guinness, the master of transformation and the role that haunted his entire life. He was the greatest master of transformation on the silver screen, a man who could become anyone in the blink of an eye. And yet, the most difficult role Sir Alec Guinness ever played was that of the perfect husband and father, a role he performed for 62 years. Modern audiences may remember Sir Alec Guinness best as the wise Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars universe, but his legacy is far more vast and radiant than that. Knighted by the Crown and celebrated by critics as a chameleon of British cinema for his astonishing versatility, there was one truth that millions of viewers never knew. Alec Guinness was locked in a deeply tormenting inner battle. Deeply attracted to men, he chose to marry Marula Salomon in 1938 to preserve the image of a refined gentleman. That marriage, which lasted over 6 decades and produced a son, became an impenetrable shield that allowed him to survive in a society filled with harsh prejudice. But that perfect facade nearly shattered in 1946. In a moment when he could no longer restrain his suppressed desires, Alec was arrested by police for homosexual activity in a public restroom in Liverpool. His brilliant career, then on the rise, stood on the brink of instant destruction. Thinking quickly, at the edge of disaster, he gave the police a false name, Herbert Pocket, coincidentally the name of a character he had once portrayed. Miraculously, he was only fined and managed to escape the keen scrutiny of the press. That night, Alec returned home in a state of utter panic. The body of the master actor trembled uncontrollably, caught between the lingering fear and the fleeting moment of desire in the darkness. Unable to bear the weight of his deception any longer, he broke down and confessed everything to his wife. In response to a confession that could have destroyed any marriage, Marula did not scream or reproach him. She simply stepped forward and embraced her shattered husband. Understanding the darkest corners of his being, she chose to become his anchor, holding him steady against the storm instead of pushing him into the abyss. After that terrifying night, Alec Guinness learned to conceal himself more carefully than ever before. The shock of 1946 left him in a constant state of vigilance. He gradually withdrew, becoming more somber and reserved even at the peak of his fame. His fear haunted him so deeply that he converted to Catholicism with strict devotion, a desperate attempt to cleanse his soul and suppress the same-sex desires that still burned within him. He turned his own life into a closed performance that would never be allowed to end. The radiant glory of the Golden Age was illuminated by the extraordinary talents of these legends. But behind their unforgettable performances were lives suffocated by prejudice and the harshness of their time. They gave audiences perfection on screen, only to spend their real lives performing a bitter and fearful play until their final breath. Whether hiding behind sham marriages or struggling to preserve love in the shadows, they all paid the price with the freedom of their own souls. These stories are not only a magnificent artistic legacy, but also a silent sigh echoing through history. If you feel moved by the painful truths hidden behind the velvet curtain, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to support us in uncovering more authentic and compelling stories from the world of cinema. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.